specifically, okay, awesome, got it. So specifically why we work with youth, in the United States here, which is nearly like 15 million, like as 15 million people, as the statistics show, 14.5% of the US is LGBTQ identifying, and 1/3 of us experience mental illness. I don't think that's a very, I don't know if I would use that word. This is the statistics that I use, but we're disproportionately impacted by addiction, by self-harm, more likely to overdose. And why is that? Because oftentimes, like when we're kind of like even talking about substances, when we're talking about drugs, there's already a stigma. I'm going to speak in Spanish in a little bit. Sorry, I know I have to be clear, but a veces en nuestras comunidades, también en nuestras familias, cuando uno usa drogas, a veces like, oh, es drogadito, oh, le gusta la mala vida. Like I feel like our way of thinking can sometimes be very reactionary and very dismissive. And specifically when it comes to the United States, like any form of substance use legislation that we've always kind of had, or just kind of prevention, always looks like criminalization. The first form of drug legislation for people of color, like has always been to target people of color. The first one being San Francisco City Ordinance in 1912, which is specifically for Chinese opium dens, to not have white people be going into like these opium dens because they didn't want that intermingling. So even when we kind of started seeing like the war on drugs start to happen in the 1970s and the 1980s, it was specifically to target Black people. It was to target Latina people, where you can see the man with the poster where he's saying the war on drugs is a war on us. It was just led to a lot of damaging results for our community. Even our community here in Boa Heights was like really impacted by this, like when we had lots of gang violence. And we can say to an extent that that has gone down, but how was it gone down? Like how, like people were just put into prison, and our community is still hurting because of this. I feel like there were still like no tangible solutions or actually any education around substances that we can use. And a lot of this also impacts the way that we organize schools. Like I said, we do a lot of work with youth where we have something, I'm not sure if y'all have heard of the term, the school to prison pipeline, when we already start seeing a lot of students, youth be facilitated to go into prison by just simply even things like possessing drugs. I remember when I was in high school, they would have dogs come in, like they would bring in the security dogs and they would do like our checks and sniff our backpacks. And like, yeah, like a lot of us got caught. Like it was just kind of a way, like looking back, like I don't know, it was like a little traumatizing looking back because like the police would come in their uniform, they had guns on them. And it's just like, we're here to learn. And it just sucks that we always had to be in such a hostile learning environment in that kind of way. And at the end of the day, we weren't actually provided with the education. Like I said, we're in Boa Heights, and then also communities like South Central. I was living in South Central. We're like historically like communities, working class communities, but communities that have also been neglected, right? Like sometimes we don't even have access to basic needs when it comes to like groceries, school supplies, but we have a plethora of liquors and dispensaries. So also it's just kind of like when you view things at an individual level and not a systemic level, it's very easy to blame the student. It's very easy to blame a young person. And that's really not fair. And I think that's an example of how students don't fail at school. It's actually schools failing students. So I'm kind of gonna go in with that, like also as well, I know I've been doing a lot of talking right now, so please always feel free to stop me, put in the chat. This is also so ultimately supposed to be a community platica. We're in conversation with one another, and like I said, we're setting that intention where we're here to all learn. So I'm a facilitator, see me as a facilitator, but know that the intention of the space is that we are all educators and learners during this workshop. And I come from a background in education. When I was at UC Riverside, one of my majors was education. And it was like education, not in the sense of kind of like teaching a subject, more so like radical education of like unpacking kind of the image that we see here, that what is schooling versus learning. And this is an image by George Kuonos. And so already kind of want to already see the juxtaposition that we have here, where schooling, as we see on the left, is all about discipline. It's about consuming, finding information, teaching you orders. We operate on this time, and you're here to look for answers. As opposed on the other side, when we see learning, which learning is about starting with questions. It's about creating, exploring your passions and interests. And oftentimes it's social. It is not supposed to be isolated or standardized. It is a very personal experience because intelligence is just as subjective as beauty. I feel like oftentimes in school, when we standardize tests, when we want to standardize, like, okay, this uniform, one size fits all. And if you are not succeeding in this one size fits all, then you're a failure. And that's not how we work as humans. There's no such thing as a one size fits all. There's no even one size fits all with clothing. And so everyone is very different. Everyone has their own knowledge that they can possess. Like myself personally, I am friends with a lot of musicians, a lot of artists who do drag, who dance. I don't got it like that. I feel, but that's okay because I have my own gifts. I have my own magic, and I feel like it's important for us to like realize what we all have to bring to the table and not necessarily kind of put hierarchies when it comes to learning, when it comes to schooling, because in that process, it's oftentimes how we were unpacking with the school to prison pipeline. It's oftentimes students of color who get criminalized for that because, like I said, we're a Latino LGBT org. So when we're focused on like the Latina aspect of us, our cultural aspect, is that our youth who come, like they're very talkative. And oftentimes, like in schools, that's kind of seen as like a problem. Like I understand youth have to be quiet, they have to learn, but like in our culture, like we talk a lot. Like that's often like that's group learning. That it's social, like as we have here with like learning. And oftentimes schools are a reflection of the society that we present, which we're in the US. Like it ultimately operates on like I'm gonna move on to the next slide. It operates in a way where we have like a mainstream kind of white way of thinking. Like schooling is set by white standards. So if you're not meeting those standards, then you're a failure. But I'm gonna unpack that in the slides, and I wanna introduce this term first. That's called deficit thinking. And deficit thinking is when students are automatically perceived in a negative light. And there is different forms of deficit thinking. There's cultural deficit thinking, which you see a group of like ethnicity of people or a cultural group of people who like this. There's familial deficit. There's deficit for families, deficit for schools. And so when students are automatically perceived in a negative light, we already have this perception that they're empty, which is where we get this concept of the banking method of education, which actually comes from the image of this man here. His name is Paulo Freire. He was a Brazilian scholar, and he came up with this concept like a revolutionary education. If any of you have ever read the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it's a very dense book, but it's a really good book. I promise you it's an amazing read. But the banking method of education is basically the assumption that students come into school without any knowledge. And so the instructors are there simply to feed them information. And for many of us, this is the schooling experience we have. Even the way that we set up classrooms in such a way where like we have every single person facing one person on the board, kind of like myself, if I had a board, I'm the teacher. When you also do that, you're kind of implying that only one person knows everything, right? Because everyone has to be facing you. As opposed to like if when classrooms are set up, like when I was in college, like and I got to like take higher classes and like we all sat like around in a table. It's like even the professor, it's like we're in conversation with one another and everyone here is contributing. And so the fact that a lot of schools are more so structured in a way where everyone is just facing one person is a reflection of this, the banking method of education, the assumption. And so, as I said, it's like also, sorry, I'm just move this here. And so oftentimes, like I said, with the white standards, it is assumed that students of color lack basic knowledge when they enter a school. Deficit thinking makes it seem that students are at fault and encourage a banking system of education, right? Because we're empty. We have nothing to bring. And when you really stop to like think about that and like really process that, it's just like you're empty, you have nothing to bring. Like it's going to impact your self-esteem. It's going to impact the way you perceive yourself. And this is kind of an image that I feel like kind of represents that. And I feel it's oftentimes as someone who's a product of LAUSD, the Los Angeles Unified School District, I feel like this is oftentimes like the issue. And I remember when like I myself was like a youth who was like ditching class. I was quote unquote like an at-risk youth. But looking back, it's just because the school was already assuming that I had nothing to bring. Like they already were viewing me in a negative light. So they were setting me up for failure. And that's not fair. And so I want to introduce what is like challenges this deficit way of thinking, what challenges the banking system of education. And it's actually it's called community cultural wealth, which is in our title. And this is something that comes from critical race theory. I'm gonna move on to the next slide, y'all. So the person who coined it is the one in the image right there, Tara J. Yoso. She was actually my professor in college. Like we didn't really get along, but she was an amazing educator. I'll give her the like, yeah, like, but and so she introduced this concept. She like coined this concept where actually like students of color do have a lot to bring. It just doesn't necessarily fit into like white standards of education. And she introduced this concept of community cultural wealth, where like students of color come in with familial capital, social capital, navigational capital, resisting capital, linguistic capital, and that's all part of our cultural capital. And just because they don't look like what it looks like by white mainstream forms of education, that doesn't mean we don't bring nothing. And right now, y'all also like it's like a workshop / training. So I want y'all to take some time. Like I kind of like I said, there's a lot, and there's gonna be a lot of talking, but if any of you have a piece of paper, if any of y'all are taking notes, I want y'all to kind of do something like you could either put CCW, which stands for Community Cultural Wealth, in a circle right here, or you can put your name, like myself, I put my name, I put Victor, and then I have all the different capitals. So I put family capitals right here, I have social capital, aspirational capital, linguistic, resistant, and navigation. My handwriting's not the best, but just if you kind of want to further like engage, I'm gonna give y'all like 2 minutes. Your circles don't have to be perfect. I'm gonna start talking again at 1:31, but I want y'all to create your own little like community cultural wealth circle. We're gonna tap into this. We're gonna discover what our own community cultural wealth looks like. So like I said, either put your name in the middle, and then it's 6 circles in total that goes around. So please take the moment to do that, y'all. I'm gonna put myself on me. I'm just gonna, so y'all can have some time to do that. Okay. Adrian, I saw that you said, what does the end of resisting capital say? Like, do you want me to read like the text? Okay. I'm gonna, yes, it is cut off for me. Okay, so for resisting, y'all don't have to write what's in the text. Y'all just have to, but it says knowledge and skills developed through, let's see, we're gonna go through having to overcome challenges. But thank you for your question, Adrian. But I think that's enough time for everyone. Your circles don't have to be perfect. I don't have the best handwriting, because now we're gonna be going through each individual capital and like what it means. So the first one, y'all, that we are going to go to is, wait, sorry, wait, go to the next slide. There you go. Social capital. This is our networks of people and our community resources. And so with social capital, this like the networks is best when it comes to communities of color too. It is what helps us succeed, especially when going off to college. And this includes the resources that goes with being part of our community. I've included some images that we have here in Boa Heights. This is the community we are based off of. Just like if even when we're like LGBTQ identifying, like myself, like yes, I'm a programs coordinator. I'm an organizer. That's like my title, but I'm also just Victor, and I'm someone who goes out to the clubs. I'm part of that, like the nightlife. A lot of my friends do drag, and I'm part of that community. Like, especially, I'm so happy to say that here in LA, like our community, like our LGBTQ nightlife, we really take care of each other, and like we really support each other. Um, and this is like ways in like even we uplift. Like oftentimes we want to say like, oh, like it's just like hanging out, but like no, like for many of us who are queer, people, trans, people of color, like when you're LGBTQ, like these spaces are sacred. Like this is what really keeps us nourished. Like it's our culture. And like I kind of want to give this is just different pictures of myself, like and my friends, but like, just to even give you an example of myself personally of social capital, like I got into a car crash, I want to say in March, yeah, on March. And like that's my car totaled. Still hurts to see that. But like I was able to start a GoFundMe and like be able to like pull it out. And I had that because of my social capital. I have that, like I can really say like I'm so happy, like of course with my family and then chosen family as well, that we're able to have that support. And that's an example of social capital. And I want you to kind of put any social groups you're part of. Like, are you part of a dance class? Are you part of a sports group? Or what are your social capital? It doesn't have to be like super elaborate text, but right now with your little like group right here on the circle, write what your social capital is about. Like I go to dance classes at Reach LA. I'm part of that community. I feel like I'm part of the LA nightlife, LA LGBTQ nightlife. Let's see, like I'm also part, I don't know. I'm part of like different groups, but what groups are you part of? Like, where does your, like, think of that? Like, who even put your community? Like, I'm from East Hollywood, but I'm also here in Boa Heights. So like, that's also my community. And those are my ties to social capital. So go right ahead and just whatever social capital means to you as well, put that on your social capital, like in your social capital circle. But now, okay, and I see something in the chat. I have, oh yeah, no, I'm good, Toki. It's all good now. Honestly, it looks horrible, but it was very, very minor. It was actually, yeah, it's a funny story, but I digress. I'm gonna return to the presentation. I'm gonna move on to the next capital. Which let's see, sorry, I just need to move the. So our next one is linguistic capital. And these are the intellectual and social skills learned through communication experiences in more than one language and or style. So myself personally, I grew up in an immigrant family, and my parents themselves to this day, like, and my whole, they don't speak any English. And I kind of remember kind of growing up, it was a little bit of a disadvantage at times, or it was not a disadvantage, it was just challenging sometimes because I had to navigate a lot of things that I feel like are for adults. And like I was like 5 years old, like I feel like in that kind of way, but I feel like now it's just such a strength because since I was 5, I grew up translating. As soon as I learned English, like I had to like be translating for my parents. And that's specifically to like being able to speak like a language. But what I also mean by style, because I have a couple authors on here, like I have Gloria Anzaldúa, Zora Neale Hurston, Audre Lorde, and specifically with Zora Neale Hurston, I remember when I first read her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God. I was in 11th grade, and it was my first time reading something that was written in African American vernacular. And I had to be reading it out loud because I had never been exposed to that kind of writing in a book, and learning that African vernacular language that we have the acronym AAVE has its own syntax, grammar, and spelling. And I feel like oftentimes we want to dismiss AAVE as just being like deficit, right? As like we're unpacking like, no, this is the standard. This is how we should be speaking English. When as I learned through reading Zora Neale Hurston's work, like actually no, like this is also its own legitimate language. It's just not being recognized by the master narrative. And Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa, well, I want to talk about Gloria Anzaldúa first. Gloria Anzaldúa, she wrote a book called The Borderlands. She is like a queer Chicana, and she's from Texas, and I feel like when I first read her book, I don't know, like it just opened so many doors for me because I had just never seen anyone write like that, where she was just loudly calling herself like a lesbian and like in a word that's considered very derogatory in Spanish, and just being so fierce. And she also presented this idea where she was like, because oftentimes for those of us who speak English and Spanish, like I remember they're like, no, 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 choose one. You can't do both. Like you sound ghetto, you sound ignorant. Like, yeah. And Gloria was like, actually, there's no such thing as an official language. She's like, I speak like 5 different languages. She's like, I speak English, I speak Spanish, I speak Chicano Spanish, I speak Texas Spanish, and I speak borderland Spanish. And it was like, well, she's like, and she basically introduces that idea that no one should be policing your language and no one should just be doing that. And that kind of also goes along with code switching, which I feel like is something times like also as like for those of us who have that experience of being racialized or marginalized, that's a different skill that we have in our own where we know how to switch it up. And that itself is its own capital. So right now, y'all, with linguistic capital, put any languages you speak, or anyways, you also feel like you have to navigate. Like sometimes too, as like queer and trans people, I feel like oftentimes we also have to know how to like talk differently, so we don't experience violence, unfortunately. But what's your linguistic capital? Your own style, like, and like I said, yo, this even goes with like slang. I remember like I was in like Puerto Rico like last year, and like I feel like I was able to move just because I was able to pick up on their slang real quick, and I was like, okay, like at least that. But they sniffed me out. They're like, you're a Mexican. I was like, ah, it's okay. But it's still fun. Like, just I want y'all to think of like what is your forms of linguistic capital, whether you speak Spanish, whether you speak Korean, Tagalog, like what's your linguistic capital, or how do you, or if you code switch, you could also add that, or anything that linguistic capital means to you, just go ahead and write it right now too. I'm going to move on to the next capital. And now we have aspirational capital. And this is the ability to maintain hopes and dreams for the future, even in the face of real and perceived barriers. So on the first image on the left, it's like an immigrant family at a immigration rights rally, I would say. And then the person in the middle, for those of you who watched Legendary on HBO Max, which is about ballroom house community and voguing, that is Leomi Maldonado, also known as the Wonder Woman of Vogue. And I just think she's just such, I don't know, an amazing person and so inspirational, always fiercely herself. And I don't know, people like her, people like so many people like her, like shouldn't be in those positions of fame and power that they now have. And it's just so inspiring. And the person next to her is actually Tupac Shakur. And that's his poem From the Rose That Grew from Concrete. And so what are your aspirations? And what are the real and perceived barriers that we have? And by perceived barriers, I feel like oftentimes we ourselves, oftentimes it's like queer and trans people, as people of color, we often feel like we don't belong in a certain space. And we're made to feel like that. What are some like, but what are your aspirations? Write them down right there in your aspirational capital. I really want, like, this is like for yourselves to like be able to unpack and have that for yourself. Like, what are challenges, or like, when has someone told you you shouldn't be here, or you're stereotyped in such a way that you shouldn't be doing this because of the way that you look? Or you shouldn't, like myself, one of my other majors was philosophy in college. I'm like, I don't know, like I often was like finding myself being in those classes like, oh my God, like why are we just reading like Greek philosophy? And I felt like when I was there, I started challenging a lot of my professors, telling them like, hey, how come you don't have any Black writers, any Latina writers, any Asian writers? And it was, I don't know if it got to the department, but they ended up creating like they ended up hiring a professor that specifically focused on the philosophy of race. And so I was like, okay, like period. That's what I'd say, just, you know, like even the ways that we take up space in our wing. But go ahead and put that in your aspirational capital. And if you have any questions, y'all, also if any of y'all want to share anything too, if y'all are feeling inspired by any of this, please also feel free to unmute yourselves and tell me about it. But I'm going to move on next. The next one is a navigational capital. And this is a skill of maneuvering, navigating, and dominating institutions that are not meant to help you succeed. And so I specifically focus on the experience of college, y'all, because like for me, like going to college was a big deal because like I'm not just the first in my family who got to graduate from high school and graduate from college. Like I'm the first in my family to get past the 6th grade education. Like my dad still can't really like read or write. But that doesn't mean he's not intelligent, you know? And like I feel oftentimes, yeah, like these institutions, like even now we get to take up space. I'm so happy I got to go somewhere like UC Riverside, where it was predominantly people of color, predominantly working class people who came from like similar experiences. But we had to get there. Like ultimately, a lot of these institutions, like they were made for us in mind. So oftentimes when we find ourselves failing there, it's because it was meant to be like that. And also, but when it says dominating institutions, it also means like applying for food stamps, applying for financial aid, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, when folks were applying for rent relief. Or even if you know how to use the bus, like if you know how to use public transit, you know how to get around, that is navigational capital. And so I really want you to think of ways that like you have navigational capital. What are ways that you've learned to like navigate an institution where you weren't supposed to be there to find the resources and the support that you needed? And I'm see the chat has something. So Sandy Sierra said, I feel like being able to navigate financial literacy is such a yes, Sandy, and that honestly, I feel like that's something I still don't have. And Amaya Wooding said, literally all form of medical transition is designed to discourage and prevent trans people from accessing care. LMAO. And then also Amaya and Sandy, would you any of you like to also elaborate more on what y'all shared in the chat? Please feel free to do so. And if you, sorry, go ahead, Sandy. Yeah.
This is like the first thing I thought of, because I think it's probably my parents weren't very, I mean, they came to this country too from Mexico, and I don't think they understood like how loans worked and other types of, you know, how to gain wealth. And I think coming as a first generation American, you have to learn those things yourself. And I find like even following people on TikTok, on Instagram has been very helpful. People who emphasize on, especially like women gaining financial literacy and capital has been very important for me. And I'm trying to build that. I'm trying to slowly learn. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to learn, especially as, you know, you're starting to, you graduate from college and you're navigating the loans and you're navigating just how to build that wealth so that it gets passed on to the next generation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Sandy. And I think it's very important for us. And even it's so awesome that we have social media where we can have access to that and tap into it, because I can honestly relate to you. I feel like I still don't fully have financial literacy, but I'm trying to build that capital. You know, it's something I'm conscious that I'm trying to build.
Hi, it's Amaya, she, her. I guess just building on what I said, I'm also thinking about like legal transition. And I mean, in both cases, medical and legal, just being able to learn from the experiences of people who have gone through it before me, and also understanding the history of how the institutions that we have came to be in place. Like it really is like I can benefit from the experiences of people who have gone through it, because it is difficult. And then I feel like it's my duty, almost my obligation, to help people who are kind of earlier in their journeys. And also want to point out, you know, I'm someone who comes from an upper middle class background, and yet because, you know, transness is not like culturally transmitted really, or like socially transmitted, you know, even with that background, it's still like a new challenge. I'm trying to figure it out. And so people who come from, you know, even more or like additionally burdened backgrounds, like it's even more. And so really like this is all information that has to get out there.
That part, Amaya. Thank you so much for sharing that, Amaya, on gender affirming care. And something I was actually gonna save this to later, but you already brought it up, and that's why I love when y'all get to share. You said it is my responsibility to then share this. Like we have to get this information, because that's why also this is called community cultural wealth, because unlike individual learning, we're supposed to be sharing this with one another. Right, I was like, y'all already have been seeing through the slides how you were sharing right now, Maya, with gender, how you learn from other people. Is that with community cultural wealth, with this like us kind of unpacking our own capital, is like, then how are we then passing it on to the rest of the community? How are then we all uplifting together? So I really love that you said that, Amaya. I want to be mindful of time, so I'm gonna move on to the next slides, y'all. But anytime y'all want to share, please put it in the chat, and even raise your hand if you want to even elaborate more, just like Sandy and Amaya did. But I'm gonna move on to the next slide, y'all. And so then there's familial capital, which is the cultural knowledges nurtured among familia, kin that carry a sense of community, history, memory, and cultural intuition. I myself, I'm Guatemalteco and I'm Mexican, so I felt like even, especially from the women in my family, like even though I grew up being Catholic, I don't identify with it, but I feel like spiritually, like the women, like they're just always like persínate, which Spanish means like you do a little cross or just do a prayer, and like I don't know, moments like that have brought me like so much comfort. And I feel like the women in my family have always been women who can like, even though they were not like quote unquote educated, who really have always been able to really articulate the way they're feeling and their emotions and their power. And it's just like I'm so happy that I've been able to come from like really like strong women who can do that, even in the face of like the police. I'll never forget one time my grandma, like we had a yard sale because that's how like she would make some extra money for rent. And I don't know, it's just like I'm so happy and like I'm so proud of that. Like I'm very prideful about my family and who I come to. And even though they're not, like we said, quote unquote educated. And all that's still very important to me. And just I feel like I carry on so much of like that intuition with me. And this also looks like chosen family. I have the girls from Pose on here, have up, but this is our familial. So what's something that your family has given you, passed on to you, that you feel like is very important to you? Even when like we'd get hurt, like in Spanish, we say something like sana sana colita de rana, like, you know, even little things like that, that's important. And we shouldn't undermine it, that we get to inherit it and it's part of our wealth. I'm gonna move on to the next slide, John. Okay. And then there's also the last one being resisting capital, which is the knowledges and skills cultivated through behaviors that challenge inequality. And so the entire concept of like maintaining and passing down this cultural wealth is a form, is that it's a way how we empower one another. Like Amaya, like how you shared about like navigating access to like care as well. Like that's how we're like always kind of like in conversation with like these institutions that are against us. And to elaborate a little bit more, I'm gonna move on to the next slide where I want to have this, I have this space, it's called Haciendo Caras, a historical collective memory, especially for like queer and trans people of color. It's like our elders and ancestors experienced discrimination and violence, but they weren't just passive victims. I feel like it's very important just to like not dismiss them as that and just be like, oh my God, they went through this. But we come from fierce agents of change that actively resisted oppression. And even though like, you know, like this image here is from a man in, I don't know who any of these people are. I don't even know if we even had the language maybe for like non-binary or femme like back then. They were being arrested in Mexico just for being queer. And like some of them are hiding in the image, understandably, but for the most part, you can see some of them like serving face, haciendo cara, like being fierce. And like the whole point of this picture was like to humiliate them. And ultimately, like their stories did reach us. Like now we're here at this conference and we get to see, like, we don't know their names, but like they're present with us in the room right now. And we inherit that, but we come from that fierceness. And I feel like that's something, a cultural wealth, because like this was like when Tara J. Yoso created community cultural wealth, like she was being very specific to like students of color navigating college or in schools, because she wrote this book, Critical Race Counter Stories, which is very specific to like the Chicana educational pipeline. And so like my presentation, this workshop is like culture, and also haciendo caras. Toki means like making faces. Like if I don't like something, I'm like, you know, which I feel like even though sometimes it's like seen as like petty, but like we also do that on the times, like even like when we're in a space where we experience like racism and like we make a face, like that's us resisting it. If we don't like, it's a very feminine practice. It's just like a very queer practice too. And so like these men too, that's how I call it, like they're making face. But thank you so much for your question, Toki. And so like I say, I'll just to like, I feel as community code, like we inherit such fierceness, fabulosity. Like I always tell like some of our youth, like sometimes when they're scared to come out, I'm just like, you know, like I'm gonna be very real with you. You are gonna lose people, but you're also going to gain so much as well. You know, you're going to come into this community who's here to support you, and we're a lot of fun. So I'm very like, you know, it's very exciting. And just to kind of go back to that, QTPOC, if any of you heard, it stands for queer and trans people of color. And it's important that we celebrate our experiences. Our resilience and our culture are often erased. And we're the ones who are disproportionately impacted by violence, homelessness, addiction, incarceration, and poverty. As we saw earlier in the slide what I have of like Black Trans Lives Matter, like why are we saying Black Trans Lives Matter? And also that ties into like if someone has an undocumented queer experience. And a lot of what it comes from now, what we're seeing that's very popular, like we're seeing Ballroom House again explode. Beyonce's latest album, Renaissance, which amazing, y'all. Like it's just like once again, like it's getting a lot of hyper visibility. And so I just feel like it's important that like as it gets hyper visibility, there's a lot of hyper surveillance, a lot of people profit off of it, just to remember who that comes from and how are we still being represented. Because I kind of want to also unpack that kind of cultural that we're seeing and just to kind of what we took from cultural wealth to like what we're seeing in medium. So I want to unpack these 4 films. Well, one of them is a TV show, it's called Sort of, where the way we represent us, like as we recognize right now, queer and trans people of color have a lot of cultural wealth. We kind of impact, and those of you kind of look individually, that is important to tell our stories with truth and integrity. So there's this TV show called Love, Victor. I'm sorry, I'm really trying to be professional because I really dislike this show, like, because it has my name in it. And then there's also this movie called La Misión. And so these are films, like, they're both like have like these queer, like Latino men characters, boys. And I feel like they just don't do justice to like how our story should be told, because to me, there's kind of some things that I really had to unpack and be okay, why don't I like it? Because to me, in the shows, like proximity to whiteness is proximity to queerness. Like when Victor comes out, like I feel all his mentors are like white. And it's just like really annoying because like they can't speak to his experience. And oftentimes he's like, oh my God, I have all these problems. I'm like, yeah, girl, like stop listening to white queers. Like they can't guide you in that, because and oftentimes like the white partners are like, they're saving them from like their homophobic brown family. And the families are perceived as like ignorant and violent. I myself feel like, and when I came out to my family, it was a violent process. Like it wasn't just verbal arguments, it was also like physical altercations. And so I'm, as someone who personally lived through that and experienced that, I'm not here to undermine it. But even now, step back, like now I'm at a great place in my family. I work for Leia. They come, my dad has come to our office. Like I've gone into that place, but it's complicated. And like I said, I'm not trying to justify it, but it's also what they were born with. And I feel like this is my personal experience, and I choose where like I'm very patient with them. And so someone said to Maya for the see the slam poem Straight 18, which utterly lampoons it. Okay, I'm excited.
It's really funny. Yeah.
Yes. I love it. Thank you for sharing that, Amaya. And I just want to quickly juxtapose it with like something I feel like films that are like, or a TV show that's actually really different, where Mosquita y Mari is like this coming of age film of these 2 like girls in Huntington Park. For those of you who don't know Huntington Park, it's in Southeast LA. It's a very like Latina community. It's just a beautiful community. And it's not necessarily like a full on like the girls don't even know that they're queer. You know, it's a very slow burn, but it's a very beautiful and special film. And it's one of the first films that I watched, because like oftentimes when people are from try to write stories of LA or like specifically Latinos in film, like it can get really corny. Like they start speaking Spanish in a way that like we don't speak Spanish like that. They'll be like, I'm sorry, the translators told me not to accept, but like I really want to give the example. Well, they'll be like, I grew up in these streets and like our gente, and I'm on the way to get los hot Cheetos. And it's just like, we don't talk like that, you know? And so when I watched this film, I got to meet the director, and I was like, Aurora, like, how were y'all able to like authentically like represent Huntington Park and LA? Because like Huntington Park is a relatively obscure community too. Like when we think of like, even in film, we'll be like, where's the Latino community? We'll be like, it's Bull Heights. But LA is more than that. And also a lot of us are Central American too. We're not just Mexican. And so what they did during this film is that if we're gonna tell the stories of a community we're not from, everyone on the production team, the director, casting, everyone had to mentor 2 youth from Huntington Park. And you can see that intention in the film. And they still don't downplay it. Like something I like was that with them, proximity to self and culture is proximity to queerness. And the protagonists are the ones leading conversation with family and themselves. And the family is humanized and complex. And also too with the film Sort of, what I mean by because Sort of, honestly, it's a really good on HBO Max. I would really recommend you watch it. It's about like this trans MB. Their name is Sabi. They're Pakistani, and I don't know. It's fun. It's an awkward show, but they don't downplay the homophobia. Like their mom is like really like trying to figure things out. And honestly, there's times when like it's really sad, but I feel like we also see how like the mom is in a precarious situation with like the men in the family, where she also is seen as someone who like failed. But then we also see moments too where like the mother's like they ask Sabi, they're like, "Are you a hijra?" Which is like a third gender in India. So it's just kind of interesting to see how like it's just not like this queerness is part of Sabi's culture. And the fact that like you see the family kind of trying to learn of it and happening like I like moments like that. I don't like because like in Love Victor, we only see the grandparents once. And they're just like, I don't know, it was because two white gays made out at Victor's house. And then the family was like, like, and then like they like were homophobic, this, and then we never see the grandparents again. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like I really didn't like that. I was like, I really didn't like that it just got dismissed. And then because like I mean my grandparents are a part of my family. Like I know I'm being very specific to like the personal experience, but I don't think our story should just be dismissed like that. And like I said, it's more complicated. And when then like Victor's kind of always being saved by his white counterparts, it's problematic. It's really problematic. And like we have to do justice to our stories because they impact that. And we know we can when it comes to QTPOC narratives because we I feel like are in a little bit of like a renaissance too when it comes to intergenerational healing in film. I'm gonna go through this clip where like we're not, and I really like that a lot of them are being catered towards children, towards youth, where like we're seeing kind of like intergenerational healing be unpacked because right, it's just not as complicated as like, oh, this family's just violent, they hate them, did this. It's like, no, actually, it's colonization. As we're learning, we're really putting language behind this and we're complicating the narratives. It's not as simple as like understands it, doesn't understand it. It's not black and white. Like back then, like we don't live in binary worlds. Like it's gonna be fluid and it takes time. And so I'm just gonna move on to the next slide, y'all. And so I think also to like tradition is medicine and just even to return to the work that we do at Latino Equality Alliance, like our family component is a big part of what we do. Like our parents need that guidance. And sometimes like they'll come to us and like us, like myself and Jacine, we're the ones who can like really kind of like sometimes like we have that patience and like we're so happy to like be able to support it. And I feel like some of our most illuminating conversations have been coming from parents because also we can't come at our elders in such a way where we're also like, you don't know this. Like that when some of us got to go to college, when some of us got to be able to expose, just to go back to like even the navigational capital. How do we do that? And so this also impacts, like, even though it's on a minor level, like it does impact our youth because I have some statistics like here for LGBTQ youth, higher rates of depression, suicide, and substance abuse. Like they're 3 times more likely to consider, sorry, y'all, it's trigger warning in regards to self-harm, to consider suicide. There's higher rates for threat of violence, physical assault, and bullying. And the risks are even higher for trans youth. 15% of trans students leave school, and K through 12 students of higher education due to the extremity of harassment. So I think language is important. I wouldn't say they leave school, they're pushed out of school. And out of that, half of them experience homelessness. I will slow down a little. Thank you so much for that, Anna. And so that's why us at Leia, a lot of the programming we do is specifically catered to like those specific experiences. Like just to tie back to like what we unpacked here about like cultural wealth, like we wanted to make sure we're tapping into the cultural wealth that our own youth have. So we had this thing called Orgullo Camp, which stands for Pride Camp. And we had one in Boyle Heights, and then we had another one in Bell Gardens. On the picture of the left, you can see the program for it. For day one, we had a photo project with Las Fotos Project, and it was self-identity through art. Day 2, we did Cutie Connect, Drag 101, and substance use awareness workshops. And day 3, we did an exploring ballroom culture. And that day we also learned about like sexual health education. So it was like a 3-day summer camp where our youth got to come in and like learn about different things as like I touched upon these topics like here, like risk of depression, suicide, substance abuse. And we taught them in such a way that also like would be fun, right? Because it's important for you to be able to explore that and to like, as like the name of our camp states, Orgullo, pride. We want them to like step out of them. So for like the drag 101, like they learned about like how like if they want to like create like their own makeup, and if not necessarily like if you don't want to be a drag artist, what are some things you can take from the elements of drag to navigate in such a way where you can be more confident. Like our resource navigator, Bibi Discoteca, who is an icon in LA, she taught them how to do like a confidence walk. She was like shoulders up, walk straight, walk with intention. And they got to like play with wigs. And then ultimately that day too, they learned about like different substances. Like I said earlier, it impacts us. And like when you go through school in LA, they are just like, don't do drugs. And it's just like, okay, but you leave it at that. And then we actually don't even get to learn about practical things. Like for example, there's this company called Stizzy. Some of you already may know, it's a very popular cannabis company. And so Stizzy only sells to licensed dispensaries in LA. And so there's a lot of like quote unquote fake dispensaries who also sell Stizzy. And as it turned out last year, a lot of them were laced with fentanyl, which some of you don't know, fentanyl is like a very deadly chemical that it can kill you, it can cause overdose. And so if we're kind of like also like not providing that education, because our youth are ultimately going to be 18, they're going to be 21 years old. They're going to be able to go out, they're going to be able to legally consume these substances, but do they know what they're doing? Is that education really provided? And most importantly, through a harm reduction, where we're not judging you if you want to either, you know, like we want to make sure you're making the best decisions for yourself, like going back to us, making sure that they have agency and ownership of everything that they do. And day 3 with Reach LA, it's another organization here in Los Angeles, and they're heavily involved with Ballroom House community. They do free therapy, so you can actually sign up with them. They teach voguing classes. And for day 3, like when it was learning about sexual health, we were able, I don't know like if y'all watch Legendary, but Jamari, who's now part of the House of Mark Jacobs, he won the first season with his house. He actually came and was one of the workshop facilitators for this voguing class. And it was a big deal. And like, just to go back to with like the drag 101, as well as like our youth kind of learn like different elements and how to have like dancing. And even though it's just kind of seen as fun, like you see them, but all of our youth who participated in this program, in this Orgullo camp, all of them reported having higher self-esteem after the workshops and being able to attend this. And we saw them step out of their shell, and it was amazing. And a lot of these workshops, we also did it because they asked us to. Like one of them's like, I want to learn how to vote. We're like, okay, you want to learn how to vote? We're gonna bring you people to. Someone's like, I would like to be a drag artist. I'm like, okay, we're gonna connect you, like tapping them into that cultural wealth, that social capital of like being able to do that. And so this is Orgullo Camp Day 3, just like some other images that we have. Like I said, we had one in Boyle Heights, and then we also have one in Bell Gardens. And this is when they were learning about Old Wave. And it was just such a beautiful for them. And even just like with other fun stuff too, we had a space prompt for them. And this is something else that they asked from us. And they were kind of telling us how oftentimes at their schools, they still don't get to wear whatever they want to the prom. So they were like, okay, if you wanted your own dance, like we're gonna provide. And we actually had it here at our offices. And this is just kind of like them. And oh, sorry, just to return it to like our own images that we have here this day from that. And they loved it. And like, it goes like, it's important for us to also like listen to you. I think that oftentimes like we kind of sometimes feel like, okay, like we know, just because that's how we're conditioned. Like even when we started earlier in the presentation with like schooling, we teach them like, okay, like I'm the one who knows, I'm the one, I can be like, I'm the older queer, like I know what I'm talking about. This is what you need. But it's like, no, like they're the ones who need to tell me what they need. And as program coordinators, myself with JC, we plan accordingly to that. And this is such a beautiful space for them to be able to have. They loved it and they stepped out. Like I feel like sometimes too, I was like, oh my God, it's gonna get too hard to dance. Like, no, they were on their dance floor. Some of them demanded, because we had a band for them. They're like, I want to sing a song. Like, so it's just like our youth are so amazing in that kind of way. And this was like one of our favorite events. And I am coming to like the end of my presentation, y'all. So we can make sure to have like a discussion at the end. But just to return is that we've always existed. Like when I said like our streets could talk, some of the images I have here, the one on the bottom left is Vivi Vita, and that was at Boyle Heights Pride last year. The person in the middle is that's the owner of what was Jules. Her name is Jewel. There's Jules Catch One. Maybe some of y'all have heard of a show called Rhonda. It was like the first queer and trans Black bar in LA. And then the picture above it, the Nuevo Jalisco bar. Gay and Lesbian Latinos Unidos, Mosquita y Mari once again. And the top left, the top left is from a film called Tangerine. And it's like about these two trans girls in East Hollywood. That's where I'm from. It's one of my favorite films of all time, just because I feel like no other film captures where I grew up the way that one does. And it's just like we've always existed, and even in our culture, right? Like oftentimes when we're now talking about like gender fluidity, when we're talking about trans identities, is that we've always had that. We've always had like genders outside of just men or women. In Oaxaca, there's the mujeres. In India, as we talked about earlier with Sorda, there's hijiras, there's two-spirit communities. The gender binary is a colonial construct. And our communities have always been here. We've always discussed, so like, even with just kind of like the chart that we created from our cultural wealth, know that you carry this all with you. And it's important for you to all remember that even though sometimes we're often finding ourselves having to build capital or being the first ones, like you're not alone in this. And there's people who have come before you, and that's part of who you are. You've inherited it. And siempre hemos existido y resistido. Where there has always been oppression, there has always been resistance. And that is the conclusion of my presentation, y'all, because it's at 2:07. It's supposed to end at 2:20, but I do want to open up the floor for anything, any feedback that y'all want to give me, anything that you took out, anything that stood out for you that maybe you want me to ask a question about. Please let me know. I want this now to be like our space to be able to share. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I see someone has their hand raised. You can go ahead. Last name is Fowler.
Yes, Kaiwan. I just want to say hi, everyone. I just want to say I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I love the fact that you covered every culture that needed to be talked about. And that is important that we keep that in the front line because we don't want to forget our culture. Then we still want to meet the need of our community because that's still a problem with us meeting the need of the community. And your presentation just showed us that we've never been anywhere. They just tried to submerge us. They just tried to submerge us. But we've always been here. And so thank you just for covering all the cultures. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that so much. Those affirmations do mean a lot. So thank you for that.
I enjoyed like just the strength building of it all, because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in like the struggles, and we want to also engage the people we work with to really look at their strengths and look at their resilience and like all these forms of capital that don't get discussed, that they don't hear about. So yeah, it's been very helpful.
Thank you for that, Sandy, and thank you for saying that. And even the person who shared before too. Yeah, like it's important. I mean, I just came back from vacation, so I'm feeling refreshed. But I feel like a lot of us, even the work we do, I feel like it can be very emotionally taxing. It can be very laborious, and we don't get compensated. I feel like what we should, but we do important work, and I can really say that like I love the work I do. But yeah, with the organizers, they asked for the presentation last week. I was like, sorry, have it the day, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Hey, Victor, as an ally, I loved your presentation because I think as an ally, I have to be able to make safe space and be supportive and caring for everybody in the spectrum. But as an ally, I also have my own identity. And after listening to you today, I realized I am truly LA Barrio. To me, it is about my lived experience more than saddling myself with a cause. But I know that's important for some people, but I really loved how authentic, how straight up, and how lived the stories you tell are. And I really appreciated that today. Thank you.
Yes. And thank you so much for that, Scott. I appreciate that. And I think I think it's important what you said. It's just like being very specific then to our experience, just because like it goes back to like cultural wealth. It's like, how are we then in conversation with like everyone here who is a part of our community, and understanding that like there's different forms of knowledges too, and like even just like I said like earlier, like it was actually the writer Ibram X Kendi who said that like intelligence is just as subjective as beauty. And so what happens when we find ourselves like someone being told that they don't have knowledge or they're not educated, like we really have to unpack that. I want to read what Stephanie Rubio said. They said they love the statement that the binary is a colonial concept. I appreciate bringing to light that every culture has embraced everyone as they are until colonialism. Living in a rural community, it is so challenging. Thank you for the inspiration for change. And thank you, Stephanie.
Victor, I want to just say thank you so much for such an amazing presentation today. I think if I had to choose, I think your presentation is the best I've gone to so far this year, just because you made it so personal, and you really did a great job, I think, with engaging us as an audience, you know, asking us to map out these six circles of different areas that influence our being and who we are and how we want to approach the work that we do, and I guess more self-development work that's also involved in our day-to-day lives. And so it was just refreshing to hear someone from also like the East LA area. I'm also born in East LA, and I currently live in Huntington Park. So it's just like it was just all very reflective and relevant to who I am as a person. And so yeah, I just want to thank you for sharing and really engaging with us today. It's just refreshing to hear a lot of um, the messaging that you've talked about today in terms of, you know, like breaking out of the colonial system of education that we've all, I mean, I wonder if all of us have gone through, you know, an education system of growing up in the U.S. But yeah, it's nice to be reminded of having to be aware of these systems that keep us feeling like an outsider. And so I really appreciate the message that you shared with us today.
That means so much, Toki. I really do appreciate even myself, like I'm presenting on it and even this content, like I'm still someone who feels like how you said, like an outsider. Um, and so the fact that, you know, I'm happy that y'all can feel like this. It really does mean a lot. And I'm like, it makes me a little emotional. But just since like I'm hearing also since y'all are from here, I noticed that I forgot to put also like a follow-up slide. So at Somos Leia, I'll tell you spell it. I put it in the chat. That is our Instagram, our TikTok, and our Twitter. We're going to be having our Calavera Festival coming up. It's going to be on October 22nd. Tickets are $25, y'all, but if you want, you could email me at, I'm gonna put my email in the chat, Victor, at someone, you know, you need help paint, but it's gonna be an amazing show. It's a cultural night. It's our Dia de los Muertos celebration, so we're honoring our altar. Our theme this year is Semillas de Amor, which translates to seeds of love, and we're honoring youth, and it's gonna be a really fun event, and it's going to fund the programming that we get to do here at Leia, because like I said, we're a very small organization. We do big work though. And so like if you can support us, like yeah, because Leia, we haven't even been around for like 15 years. So our quinceañera is coming up. So follow us on Instagram, because that way y'all can come and party with us. Cause like I said, we do important work, but we love to party too. And it's important for us to be also have those moments. And Kitty, yes. And someone said, I feel very at home and comfortable in the space. Living on multiple intersections often leaves me lonely, and it's always so healing to be in a space that acknowledges and uplifts the intersectional experience of culture and queerness. I've been mourning the erasure of my culture's pre-colonial history, and seeing the living community in front of me fills me with hope and love. Yes, Cerberus or Cerberus, I'm so sorry if I said your name incorrectly. That's super important. It really is. And I like how you said, like, we're mourning it, right? Because there's beauty in the struggle. I feel like I think it's even oftentimes too, like a lot of emotion gets to, it's like it's a part of this work, and it's important to be hopeful and to always guide with love. So I'm I'm happy that this is also be able to be a healing space for y'all. And yeah, I hope that we could also continue to see each other. We're a community organization, so we're here with anything that you need. And we're Leia, but we are in partnership with the LA LGBT Center. So if you also need help getting directed to like legal services, whether it be in regards to like immigration, domestic violence, like there's different resources. Okay, and then I'm getting personal sense, so I'm gonna put my email in the chat again. It's very simple. It's Victor at somoslea.org. So this is my email, y'all. Just my first name and at somoslea.org. I know that we are at 2:17, which means there's 3 more minutes left, y'all. I don't know if the facilitators for the conference have anything that they need to say. No? Okay. Well,
Just thank you, Victor. This was amazing. I really enjoyed this. Like I said in the chat, you kind of made, because you talked a lot about LA, specifically made me homesick for LA, which I don't get too often. So appreciate that. But honestly, just a lot of love here for everybody that came, and really beautifully done. Thank you very much to Victor, to LEA in general, to our interpreters, both ASL and Spanish. Much appreciate all of the hard work that's gone into this. So thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Kitty. And thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a beautiful rest of your day. Happy Virgo season. And yeah, y'all, it's hot today here. If you're in LA, drink some water.